Detective Izzy Diaz investigates disappearances in Elmwood, uncovering a dark history tied to an ancient, cursed tree. The tree's roots feed on victims through rituals, and Izzy confronts the evil in a factory. Using fire, she weakens it but realizes the threat remains, vowing to guard the city. Hello everyone, and welcome to Story Loop. We know many of you use these videos to unwind and fall asleep, so before you get too cozy, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, get comfortable, relax, and let the story take you away. Story 1. The Echo of Elmwood. Chapter 1, Rust and Whispers. The Chicago wind, a beast in its own right, howled down the canyons of glass and steel, whipping debris across the cracked sidewalks of Elmwood. Not the Elmwood of postcards, mind you, with its quaint bungalows and manicured lawns. This Elmwood was a forgotten corner in the city's underbelly, a neighborhood where the rot had taken root, where sunlight struggled to penetrate the shadows cast by abandoned factories and boarded-up row houses. Detective Isabella Izzy Diaz knew this Elmwood intimately. She'd inherited it, not in a will or a trust, but in the form of a string of unsolved missing persons cases that had led her down this increasingly desolate rabbit hole. 3 people, all within the last 2 months, gone without a trace. No signs of forced entry, no ransom demands, nothing. Just empty apartments and a lingering sense of dread that settled deep into Izzy's bones. Tonight, the dread felt particularly potent. The air was thick, almost metallic, and the rhythmic drone of the city seemed muted, replaced by a low, almost subliminal whisper that seemed to slither from the very foundations of the decaying buildings. Izzy, bundled in her worn leather jacket, brushed past a graffitied wall, its lurid imagery a grotesque parody of the neighborhood's former vibrancy. She was here to revisit the scene of the latest disappearance, that of a young artist named Leo Vance. His apartment, in one of the old tenement buildings, was a chaotic mess of paint tubes, canvases, and half-finished sculptures. The smell of linseed oil still hung in the air, mingling with the sickly sweetness of decay. Izzy touched a half-finished portrait, the eyes of the subject staring vacantly into the gloom. They seemed to be searching for something lost, just like Izzy felt. She'd been over this place a dozen times. There were no clues, no forced entry, nothing of significance. It was like Leo had just vanished. She ran a hand along the dusty windowsill, her fingers brushing against something slick. It was a dried, dark smear, almost black. She knew she'd checked the windows before, and there was nothing there like this. Her heart picked up a beat. Detective Diaz, a voice startled her out of her thoughts. Officer Ramirez, a rookie with eyes that still held a hint of naivety, stood hesitantly in the doorway. Anything? Izzy shook her head, the metallic taste returning to her mouth. Not yet. But I think we might be missing something. As Ramirez began to relay information from forensics, Izzy found herself drawn back to the window. The smudge, viewed at a different angle, seemed to form a shape, a vaguely familiar pattern. Izzy pulled out her phone, snapped a picture and stared at it. It looked like a tree, gnarled and barren, that she had seen on an old map from the Chicago Historical Society. The whisper returned, louder now, feeling like it was inside her head. It was the sound of rustling leaves, the creaking of branches, and something else. Something low and guttural that resonated with an ancient unease. Chapter 2, The Roots of Fear. Izzy spent the next day immersed in the city's archives, the musty smell of old paper a welcome distraction from the unsettling feeling that had taken root in her mind. She pored over old maps, city planning documents, and neighborhood histories, searching for the significance of the symbol she'd found. Slowly, she began piecing it together. Elmwood, originally, had been a sprawling green space, a patch of woods on the outskirts of the city. The tree, the gnarled, barren tree that had been painted in the dried blood, had been a landmark, known by the indigenous people who had first inhabited the land as the Tree of Whispers. The historical records spoke of a dark history, tales of rituals, sacrifices, a connection to forces beyond comprehension. She found a local historian, a reclusive man called Mr. Elias, and it was he who confirmed her fears. The tree hadn't just been a symbol, it was a portal, a nexus point where the veil between worlds was thin. And the disappearances? They weren't random, they were offerings. The city's expansion had swallowed the trees, but the roots remained. The city grows, but the old magic persists, Elias had croaked, his eyes wide with a chilling knowledge. It adapts. It finds new ways to feed. Izzy left Elias's home with a sense of impending dread. Her gut told her the whispers weren't just her imagination, they were a call, a siren song leading her deeper into the heart of the darkness. She had to discover why this was happening, and how, before the roots swallowed everyone she had ever known. Chapter 3: Descent. The following night, Izzy returned to Elmwood, this time armed with not just her badge and gun but with a deep understanding of the forces she was up against. The air felt heavier, the shadows more menacing. The whispers were now a chorus, a cacophony of rustling leaves, the scraping of claws, and the low guttural moans. She followed the feeling, drawn to the abandoned factory at the edge of the neighborhood. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the unsettling scent of decaying organic matter. Deeper within the building, beyond the shattered machinery and rusting pipes, Izzy found it. A pit, an impossibly deep hole in the concrete floor, surrounded by a circle of grotesque symbols, crudely drawn in dried blood. The whispers now had a direction. They were emanating from the pit, from the darkness below. As she peered in, she saw movement, a shifting, writhing mass of shadows, and felt a pull to the abyss. Something was calling to her, promising answers, promising power. She fought back, hurl a fragile barrier against the overwhelming draw. She remembered her uncle's words, "The darkness will never truly win if there is light, even a flicker." Then, from the shadows, shapes began to form. Figures, twisted and distorted, with elongated limbs and eyes that glowed with a malevolent light. They were the echoes, the remnants of those who had been taken, their souls now trapped, bound to serve the entity that resided below. Chapter 4: The Ritual. The fight was brutal, a desperate dance against the encroaching darkness. Izzy's gun was nearly useless, the bullets seemed to pass through the figures as if they were made of smoke. She was thrown against a wall, the breath knocked from her lungs. As the figures closed in, Izzy felt a sliver of hope. She remembered the historian's words, a counter-ritual that used the power of light. Fumbling with her lighter, she set fire to a pile of old newspapers she found nearby. The flames roared into life, cutting through the shadows, momentarily repelling the figures. Grasping her chance, Izzy hurled a Molotov cocktail she made from her emergency kit into the pit. The explosion shook the building, and a shriek of pure pain echoed from below. The shadows receded, and the building trembled as something deep within the earth began to stir. Izzy knew she hadn't won, she'd just bought time. The roots of this evil were deep, and even if she managed to escape this place, the whispers of Elmwood would continue. She had a purpose now, not as a detective, but as a guardian, protecting the city from the ancient evil that had awakened. It was a long, dangerous path, and she knew that she would hear, and feel, more of the echo of Elmwood for her remaining days. But she knew now that she would keep the flickering light alive. Story 2: The Whispering Gallery. The old Blackwood Manor stood on a windswept hill, its dark silhouette a jagged tear against the bruised twilight sky. Locals avoided it, their whispers carrying tales of a family cursed and a house that devoured secrets. Elias Thorne, a historian with a penchant for the macabre, was, naturally, drawn to it. Armed with a flashlight, a tattered notebook, and a healthy dose of morbid curiosity, I pushed open the creaking iron gates and stepped into the overgrown garden. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decay. Twisted branches of ancient trees reached like skeletal fingers, their leaves rustling with a dry, papery whisper. The manor loomed before me, its stone walls stained with moss and age, windows like vacant eyes staring out into the gathering darkness. I felt a prickle on my skin, a sense of being watched, but I dismissed it as a product of my overactive imagination. The front door, miraculously, wasn't locked. It groaned open with a mournful shriek, revealing a cavernous hallway shrouded in shadows. The silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic drip of water somewhere in the depths of the house. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, illuminating peeling wallpaper, cobwebs thick as shrouds, and portraits of long-dead Blackwood family members whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. I felt a growing unease, a sensation like a cold hand pressing against my chest. I began to explore, methodically moving from room to room. The ballroom, once opulent, now lay in ruins, the grand chandelier a skeletal cage of rusted metal. The library, though filled with shelves, held books whose spines had crumbled to dust. Each room echoed with a silence that felt pregnant with untold stories, with forgotten tragedies. As I ventured deeper, I noticed a recurring motif, a series of intricate carvings depicting a spiral, often within a circle. They were on the mantelpieces, on the window frames, even etched into the wooden floors. I couldn't shake the feeling that they held some significance, some dark secret of the manor. I eventually found myself in a long, narrow corridor. The air here felt different, colder, and clammier. The walls were lined with portraits, their subjects all staring straight ahead with unsettlingly vacant expressions, their eyes following me as I moved. At the very end of the corridor was a small wooden door, its surface dark and worn. The spiral symbol was carved into the center of it, more prominent, more unsettling than before. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. It was cold, like touching metal that had been buried in ice. I turned it, and the door creaked open, revealing a small, circular chamber. This was the place from which the unsettling whispers in the house seemed to emanate. The room was bare, except for a small stone dais in the center. The walls were smooth and slightly concave, creating a peculiar acoustic effect. As I moved further inside, I realized the whispers were coming from all around me, from the walls themselves. They were low, indistinct, a chorus of voices murmuring secrets I couldn't quite grasp. Then, the whispers began to form words. They were fragmented, disjointed, but their tone was laced with malice. "Don't listen. They hissed, they want you." My heart hammered in my chest. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just the acoustics of the room playing tricks, but the fear was very real. I backed away towards the door, but it slammed shut with terrifying finality. I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, morphing into a cacophony of pained moans and desperate pleas. I covered my ears, but the sounds seemed to penetrate my very bones. The room began to spin, the walls seeming to close in on me. The spiral symbol on the door seemed to pulsate, growing in size, swallowing the door, swallowing my vision. I stumbled back, tripping over the dais and landing hard on the stone floor. The sudden impact brought a sharp, blinding pain to my head. I looked around, frantically trying to find an escape. But the whispers had become screams now, piercing, agonizing screams that seemed to tear at my sanity. Then, I saw it. On the dais, hidden beneath a layer of dust and grime, was a book. Its cover was blank, except for the familiar spiral symbol etched into the center. I reached for it, drawn by an irresistible force, and opened it. The pages were filled with a script I didn't recognize, a language that seemed to writhe and twist on the page like living things. As I flipped through the pages, the screams intensified, and I began to understand. I wasn't trapped in a room, I was trapped in a story. The story of the Blackwood family's curse. The spirals, the whispers, the screams, they weren't accidental, they were the echoes of their suffering, trapped in the fabric of the house, waiting to claim a new victim. I saw grotesque images forming on the pages, horrific events replaying themselves over and over. the Blackwoods sacrificing themselves to something dark. Something ancient. They weren't just cursed, they had become a part of the curse. The house itself was the vessel of this terrible thing kept prisoner and fed by tragedy. I tried to close the book, to throw it away, but my fingers were numb, unresponsive. The words on the page seemed to reach out, pulling me in, drawing me deeper into madness. The room continued to spin, the whispers turning into roars that threatened to shatter my eardrums. I felt something crawling, creeping at the edge of my vision. Dark shapes started to appear from the corners of the room. Hands that were not my own. Then, a single, clear voice cut through the cacophony. It was low, guttural, and full of malevolence. "Welcome home," it whispered, and something cold and sharp pierced through my heart. I lost consciousness, the room spinning into darkness. I don't know how long I was out. When I woke, I was lying on the floor of the circular chamber, the book gone. The door was open, and the house was silent. The sun was rising, its pale glow casting long, eerie shadows. I stumbled out of the room, my body trembling, my mind reeling from what I had experienced. I staggered out of the manor, leaving the whispers and the darkness behind. But I know they didn't stay there. I feel them still, lurking behind the corners of my vision, whispering in my dreams. I am no longer just a historian, I am now a part of the manor's story, a piece of its dark legacy. I fear I carry a piece of the curse within me. And I know, with chilling certainty, that one day, the Whispering Gallery will call me back. It always does. It is waiting. Story 3. The city breathed. The city breathed, a monstrous, steel and glass lung. Amelia, a graphic designer fueled by deadlines and lukewarm coffee, barely noticed anymore. Tonight, though, the city felt different. Thicker, somehow. Oppressive. The air hung heavy with the pre-storm static that always made her skin crawl. She was working late, the only one left on her floor of the towering Carter building. The rhythmic hum of the ventilation system, usually a comforting white noise, now morphed into a low, guttural growl in her ears. She blamed the caffeine crash. Suddenly, the lights flickered. The hum stuttered, died. Silence. A silence so complete it felt like cotton stuffed into her ears. Then, a single, high-pitched whine, like a dentist's drill aimed directly at her skull. Amelia jumped, heart hammering. "Hello," she called, her voice thin and fragile in the vast emptiness. Only silence answered, a silence that felt actively malicious. Pulling out her phone, she found the screen dead. No signal. Not even a flicker of battery life. Panic clawed at her throat. The elevators were out, of course. Trapped. Swallowing hard, she decided to take the stairs. Better than sitting here, waiting for what, exactly? The stairwell was cold, damp, and smelled of dust and decay. The emergency lights, casting a sickly green glow, revealed graffiti that seemed to writhe on the concrete walls, obscenities replaced with symbols she didn't recognize, symbols that prickled on her subconscious. As she descended, a rhythmic dripping echoed from below. Water? She picked up her pace, her footsteps a frantic percussion against the concrete. She reached the 10th floor when she heard it. A whisper. A low, sibilant sound that snaked around her, slithering into her ears. It seemed to be calling her name. Amelia. Freezing in place, she squinted into the gloom. Shadows danced in the corners of her eyes, playing tricks on her. Was she imagining it? Then she saw it. At the bottom of the next flight of stairs, a figure. Tall and gaunt, shrouded in darkness. It wasn't moving, just standing there, impossibly still. The darkness around it seemed to absorb the green light, making it a void in the stairwell. Terror ripped through her. She tried to scream, but her throat was locked tight. The figure shifted slightly, and she saw a glint of something metallic, something long and sharp. Amelia. The whisper came again, closer now, laced with an unbearable hunger. She turned and fled, scrambling upwards, her legs burning, her lungs screaming for air. The whisper followed, growing louder, more insistent with each step. She reached the top of the stairwell, the door to her floor. But it was locked. Locked from the inside. She pounded on the steel, a desperate, frantic rhythm against the deafening silence. "Help! Someone, please!" The whisper was right behind her now, hot on her neck. She could feel the phantom touch of cold, skeletal fingers. Suddenly, the door swung open. Standing there, bathed in the eerie glow of the emergency lights from inside the office, was Barry, the IT guy. His eyes were wide, vacant, and his skin had a strange, waxy pallor. "Barry!" Amelia sobbed, relief flooding her. "Get me out of here. There's something dash." He interrupted her with a smile, a slow, unsettling stretch of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "We've been waiting for you, Amelia." He stepped aside, and she saw them. The rest of her office colleagues. They were all there, standing motionless, their eyes empty, their faces pale and lifeless. Each of them held a long, silver scalpel. Then she understood. The whispers. The symbols. The darkness. This wasn't just a power outage. This was something far more sinister. She stumbled back, her mind reeling. Barry lunged, his hand clamping over her mouth, the cold steel of a scalpel pressing against her throat. "Welcome, Amelia," he whispered, his breath cold against her ear. "You're one of us now." The storm outside finally broke, unleashing a torrent of rain and a deafening roar of thunder. But amidst the chaos, Amelia's scream was swallowed by the city, lost in the symphony of fear that had begun to resonate within its steel and glass heart. The city breathed, and this time, it tasted of blood. And a terrible, unholy hunger.